The cruelest part isn't going broke. It's realizing you only mattered when you were useful. A man pretends he's lost everything and knocks on doors begging for one safe night. And what he gets from his wealthy siblings isn't a hug, not even, "Are you okay?" It's fear of being judged and a door slammed right in his face. There's a saying for this: when everything falls apart, the ones who stay are your real family. So when their kindness only shows up after they learn there's still a $100 million check on the table, what's the right move? Cut them off to protect your dignity, or make them pay the price of real change over time? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next in this journey. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. The February air in Austin had that dry, cutting bite that slipped under every layer, the kind of cold that didn't feel dramatic until it settled in your bones and refused to leave. I pulled my thrift store coat tighter around my chest and kept my head down the way people do when they're trying to disappear. Which was the whole point. My hair was greasy on purpose, flattened by 3 days without a proper wash. My hands were smeared with dirt I'd worked under my nails until they looked permanent. The soles of my shoes were peeling like tired skin, and every step rubbed a raw line into my heel that I could feel filling with warmth blood before the wind stole it away again. The plastic bag in my fist was torn down one side. Everything I owned for this little performance, an old sweatshirt, a cracked phone charger, a half-empty bottle of water, was bundled like a joke. I didn't look like Evander Van Slade, 31 years old, the guy who usually moved through the city with a clean jacket and a quiet sense of control. I looked like the man Austin stepped around without seeing. And that was exactly what I needed to be. Westlake Crest glowed ahead of me like a private planet. Tall hedges cut sharp lines beneath discreet lighting. Stonework that looked like it had been imported from somewhere old and expensive. A gated entrance with a camera that could probably count the pores on my face. I stopped outside it and stared for a second at my own reflection in the polished black panel beside the intercom. The guy staring back looked hollow. I pressed the button anyway. A buzz, then the hollow click of a speaker coming to life. Blair's voice came through like she was already bored with whoever I was. "Hello." She didn't ask who, didn't ask what I wanted. Her tone had the same tired impatience she used on people who interrupted her day. I swallowed the metallic taste in my mouth and kept it simple because the truth always shows up best when you don't dress it up. "It's me," I said. "It's Van. I lost everything. I need a place to sleep. Just one night." There was a pause long enough for me to picture her perfectly shaped eyebrows lifting, her mind running through options like she was sorting laundry by color. Then instead of the gate swinging open, it unlocked and slid just a few inches, like she was compromising with the idea of compassion. A sliver of space, not an invitation. I pushed through and walked up the stone path I'd seen in family photos and on social media. Blair had posted it like it was a trophy: the fountain at the entrance, the trimmed boxwoods, the front door that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. The door opened before I even reached the steps, and there she was, blocking the frame with her whole body as if I were a salesman with bad timing. Blair Ashford, my sister, looked flawless in a soft, expensive athleisure set. Her hair was smooth and glossy. Her nails were fresh. Everything about her said comfort, safety, control. Her eyes moved over me like I was something on the sidewalk she didn't want to step in. "Van," she said, dragging my name out like it was embarrassing to say. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't concern. It wasn't shock. It was annoyance, like I'd shown up at the wrong restaurant without a reservation. "I told you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I lost everything. The accounts, the assets gone. I've been on the street. I just need one night. I'll sleep anywhere. Garage. Laundry room. I don't care." Her gaze flicked past me over my shoulder toward the neighboring driveways, toward the quiet street, toward the invisible audience she was always managing. That single glance hit harder than the wind. "Van, this is not a good time," she said, lowering her voice. "I have people coming tonight. Important people. And you know the HOA here is insane. If anyone sees your brother," I asked before I could stop myself. She tightened her jaw like I'd insulted her. "I'm saying it's complicated," she snapped. Then she softened it instantly like she always did, slipping a silk ribbon over the blade. You need help from professionals, shelters, organizations. They have resources. It's better for you. Better for me. Not better for her reputation at the club. Not better for her perfect little image. I'm not asking you to solve my life, I said, the words scraping out of my throat. I'm asking for a roof. One night. Blair didn't move. She didn't step aside. She held her position like the doorway was a border she had to defend. Van, she said, and there it was, her real fear. Not for me. For herself. If you're really like this, people will talk. I stared at her. At the warm light behind her. At the clean, quiet world inside her 6-bedroom house. At the fact that I could smell something like vanilla candle wax drifting from her entryway. I took one step forward. She took one step back and narrowed the opening with her body. There are shelters, she said quickly. There are hotels. Cheap ones. I can Venmo you something if you need it, but you can't stay here. And then she did it. She closed the door, not gently, not with sadness, with the same clean finality you use when you're done with a conversation. The slam echoed down the street, sharp and humiliating. The deadbolt turned metal, sliding into place like a verdict. I stood there a second longer than I should have, looking at the door like it might reopen if I stared hard enough. It didn't. I walked away with my face burning and my hands shaking, and the worst part was realizing how smooth she'd been, how practiced, like she'd rehearsed the exact tone for rejecting the kind of person she never planned on becoming. 2 miles later, my shoes were wet inside. My heel felt like it was split open. My stomach had shrunk into a hard knot that made me dizzy when I stood too fast. Glass-lined district rose up around me in cold angles and reflective windows. Graham's place was all steel and glass, the kind of architecture that looked impressive in the daylight and empty at night. It matched him. I rang the bell and waited. The door opened almost immediately. Graham's face went through a flash of shock. Van, he said, like he'd stepped into a glitch. For half a heartbeat, I thought maybe he'd be different. Then his eyes darted left, then right, checking the street. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. Get in, quickly. He pulled me into the foyer and shut the door behind me like he was hiding evidence. Then he stopped. He didn't usher me deeper into the house. He didn't offer water. He stood in front of me with his arms crossed, leaving a careful distance between us like poverty could rub off. What happened to you, he asked. I gave him the same line I'd given Blair. Simple, brutal. I lost everything. I need a place to sleep. One night. Graham's face tightened, not with grief, but with calculation. I watched it happen in real time. The mental math, the risk assessment, the list of consequences. He exhaled like I'd handed him a problem he didn't have time for. Van, I can't have this, he said. I have a professional image, patience, people who talk. If anyone finds out my brother is showing up like this, as if I'd chosen it. Are you serious? I asked, and my voice came out raw. I'm asking for one night. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek wallet, expensive leather, the kind you buy because it signals something. He peeled out a couple bills and held them toward me without stepping closer. Here, he said, 50. Go get a cheap motel room, shower, eat something. When you're presentable, we'll talk. The bills hovered between us like a wall. I stared at the money. $50. That was what my brother's discomfort cost. I didn't take it right away. I looked at his face instead, searching for the kid who used to beg me to come to his soccer games, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I searched for anything that looked like shame. Nothing. Graham, I said quietly, do you even hear yourself? His jaw clenched. Don't do this. Don't do what I snapped. Be your brother. Ask you to act like a human being. His eyes hardened. I'm giving you help. You're paying to get rid of me, I said. For a fraction of a second, something flickered, irritation maybe, or guilt. Then it vanished under the same polished armor he wore everywhere. I have limits, he said flatly, and I have to be up early. I can't deal with this right now. I took the 50, not because I needed it, because I needed proof that this moment was real, that my mind wouldn't soften it later into something easier to forgive. Graham opened the door and gestured out like a bouncer. "Take care of yourself," he said, already stepping back into his warm house. Already done. The door shut before I even reached the bottom step. No deadbolt sound this time. He didn't even bother to make sure I walked away safely. I stood under the yellow light of his porch fixture, the crumpled bills in my fist, and I understood something that made me feel colder than the night air. The test had started answering me, not with hesitation, not with confusion, with speed, with ease. They didn't reject me because they didn't recognize me. They rejected me because rejection was a reflex. Because they'd built a life where people like me right now, were an inconvenience to be handled and erased. I walked until the glass and steel disappeared behind me, and the neighborhoods changed. The streets got narrower, the cars got older, the lawns weren't sculpted into perfection. They were lived in, real. East Austin wasn't trying to impress anyone. Somewhere ahead past the last of the boutique bars and the new condos was a small working-class street where my half-brother lived. Miles Calder, a public school teacher, a man everyone in my family treated like a footnote, and the part that made my throat tighten was admitting the truth I didn't want to face. I'd been part of it. I'd rolled my eyes at his choice to teach. I'd smiled politely when Blair joked about his salary. I'd let Graham's condescension float across dinner tables without shutting it down the way I should have. I'd told myself I was keeping the peace. All I'd really done was teach them that cruelty had no consequences. The wind pushed against my back, urging me forward. My bag tore a little more. My shoes stuck to the sidewalk with each step. I stared at the dark line of houses ahead and felt something twist in my chest, fear that had nothing to do with the cold. Because there was one door left. And if Miles closed it too, then I wasn't just going to lose my faith in my family. I was going to lose it in myself. But the truth, the thing I hadn't let myself say out loud yet, was that this wasn't only about finding out who would shelter me. 3 weeks earlier, I'd found something in our family's books that didn't make sense. A small irregularity, a signature that didn't match, a transfer that had my name on it but didn't feel like mine. Blair and Graham had been hungry lately, not for food, for control. And this brutal little test, it wasn't just a way to see their hearts. It was a way to drag them into the light. 3 weeks earlier, I was on the 23rd floor of my building looking down at Austin like it belonged to someone else. At night, the city lights made everything look clean, forgivable, like mistakes couldn't survive in all that glow. My office was quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the HVAC, the faint buzz of the refrigerator behind the bar, the click of my own pen against a legal pad I wasn't actually writing on. I'd been sitting there too long staring at numbers that should have been boring. They weren't. Because numbers don't lie. They just reveal what people hope you won't notice. My phone buzzed on the desk. Blair. I didn't answer right away. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then she texted like she always did, short, confident, like I was a service she paid for. Need $85,000. Kitchen remodel went over. HOA board is coming through next month. Call me. $85,000. For a kitchen. Before I could even process the anger rising in my throat, the phone buzzed again. Graham. Van, he said when I answered, not even bothering with hello. I've got an opportunity. It's time sensitive. I need 75, maybe 90 if you can swing it. I'll pay it back. He always said that part like it made it cleaner. Pay it back, I repeated, staring at the skyline. Yeah, he said quickly. It's a deal with a friend. It's solid. I just need you to move fast. What is it? I asked. A pause. Then a vague answer dressed up in confidence. It's complicated. I'll explain later. But you know I wouldn't bring you anything that wasn't worth it. I ended the call without agreeing to anything, which felt like pulling my hand out of a trap. Then a few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Miles. Hey, he said, and his voice alone sounded like a different family. Just checking in. You've been working a lot. You eating, sleeping. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a second, embarrassed by the sting behind my eyes. "I'm fine," I said. "Okay," he replied gently. "Just wanted you to know I'm here. No request, no urgency, no number attached to the conversation." When the call ended, I sat there with the quiet around me and felt something inside shift, something ugly and undeniable. Two siblings who only reached for me when they wanted money. One half-brother who reached for me because I was a person. I opened a folder on my computer labeled Family, an understatement like calling a hurricane weather. Inside were statements, transfers, trust distributions, records from years of me solving problems with my signature. I'd told myself I was being a good brother, a responsible one, the one who kept things running after our father died and left more money than he left guidance. What I'd really become was a walking ATM with a pulse. I remembered the early days after Dad was gone when Blair cried in my kitchen and swore she'd never ask for anything again. When Graham promised he was going to build something real and just needed one push. I remembered myself saying yes too quickly because I didn't want to be the cold one. I didn't want to be the brother everyone whispered about at family gatherings, the one who forgot where he came from. So I paid. I covered. I smoothed things over. And little by little, without realizing it, I taught them a lesson. That love came with a wire transfer. That family meant rescue. That if they wanted something, all they had to do was call my name. I rubbed my eyes and looked down at the most recent report. A list of disbursements. A clean set of numbers that should have matched my memory. One line didn't. It wasn't huge in the grand scheme. Not compared to the kind of money we moved every quarter. But it was wrong in a way that made my skin go tight. A transfer with my name tied to it, an authorization that looked like mine at a glance, but the signature block had a slight slant I didn't use. The request path didn't go through the usual channels, and the destination was an account I didn't recognize. I stared at it until the room felt smaller. Then I thought about the last family dinner at Blair's house. The way Miles had sat slightly apart, not because he was shy, but because the air around the table made him an outsider. Miles, my half-brother, Dad's son from a relationship before he married our mom. The truth that our family treated like a footnote when it was convenient, and like a stain when it wasn't. Blair had laughed about Miles's salary. Must be nice to have summers off, she'd said, like teaching was a hobby. Graham had chimed in. He could have done more with his life. Dad would have wanted that. Miles had smiled politely, the kind of smile you develop when you've learned arguing doesn't change the room. Elena, his wife, had reached under the table and squeezed his hand. She wore a simple ring, no diamonds, no flash. She had warm eyes and working hands, and Blair talked over her like she wasn't there. I'd watched it happen. And most of the time, I'd stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't my job to fight every battle, that if I kept things calm, the family would stay together. Now I saw it for what it was, permission. My silence had been a signed document. The next day, I called Camden Rourke. Camden wasn't family. That was why I trusted him. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't raise his voice. He just asked questions that cut through denial. He'd been with me through acquisition settlements, ugly contracts. He knew how people looked right before they tried to take something that wasn't theirs. He met me in my office late that night, coat still on, hair slightly messy, like he'd come straight from another crisis. "What's going on?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me. I slid the statement toward him. "I think something's off." Camden studied it without reacting, but his eyes sharpened. "This signature isn't you," he said after a minute. "I know." He tapped the page once. "This could be clerical. It could be a mistake. It could be Blair," I said. Then, after a beat, "or Graham." Camden didn't flinch at the names. He just looked at me like he was measuring the weight of what I was about to do. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, what I wanted to do was kick down doors. Demand confessions. Make them afraid. But fear didn't change people. It just made them better liars. "I want to know who they are when there's nothing in it for them," I said finally. Camden's brow creased. I leaned forward. I'm going to disappear. His eyes narrowed. No. I'm going to pretend I lost everything. I continued, my voice steady even as my stomach rolled. I'm going to show up at their doors looking broke and desperate. I'm going to ask for shelter. One night. No warning. No time to rehearse. Camden stared at me like I'd just confessed a crime. That's not a legal strategy, he said. That's a psychological landmine. It's the only way to see the truth, I replied. It's dangerous, he shot back. You're not invincible. You could get hurt out there. You could get arrested. You could get sick. And if your siblings realize you're gone, that's part of it, I said. Camden's voice went colder. If Blair and Graham are doing what you suspect, your absence gives them room. They can try to formalize control. They can file paperwork. They can move fast while you're out playing homeless. The word playing made something sharp twist in my chest because I knew he was right. Then we set safeguards, I said. Camden exhaled hard through his nose. What safeguards? I want security watching from a distance, I said. No mesh, no intervening unless I'm in real danger. And I want you ready in the morning with something they can't talk their way out of. Camden studied me. What does that mean? It means proof, I said. Documents. Authority. A consequence big enough to stop them from treating this like a misunderstanding. Camden's eyes held mine. You're asking me to be part of a stunt. I'm asking you to help me see the truth before it kills what's left of this family, I said. He was quiet a long moment, then nodded once reluctantly like a man stepping into a storm because his client was already walking into it alone. All right, he said. If you do this, you do it with a burner phone. You call me if anything goes sideways. I'll have a car nearby. Security will keep eyes on you. And in the morning, I'll be there. I hesitated because there was one more truth I wasn't giving him. I didn't tell Camden that a week earlier I'd seen another transaction, one that brushed the edge of a trust account tied to my name. Something subtle, easy to miss, the kind of move someone made when they thought no one was watching. I didn't tell him because I wasn't sure yet. Because if I said it out loud, it became real. Because part of me still wanted to believe Blair and Graham were just selfish, not predatory. But deep down, I knew. And that was why the test needed to be real enough to hurt. So I did it. I stripped my life down to a plastic bag and a dirty coat. I stepped out of my condo and into the cold like I was stepping out of a lie. I walked the city until my feet blistered. I let people look through me. The first night I slept at the bus station because it was bright enough to feel safer and crowded enough to disappear. The air smelled like old coffee and bleach and desperation. A man shouted at a wall for an hour. A teenager cried into his hoodie with his back against a vending machine. Near dawn, an older woman slid down beside me on the bench, her face lined in a way that told the story before her mouth ever opened. You got kids, she asked. Yeah, I said. She let out a humorless laugh. Mine forgot I exist 5 years ago. I didn't know what to say. She stared straight ahead. You'll learn something out here, she continued, voice flat. People don't ignore the homeless because they hate them. They ignore them because they're terrified it could be them. I thought about that all day. By the third night, the cold had turned from sensation to a kind of numbness that scared me more. My hands shook even when I wasn't afraid. My stomach hurt in a steady, dull way that made food feel like a dream. And still I kept going. Because I needed to know. I needed to know if Blair and Graham loved me as a brother, or only as a resource. I needed to know if Miles, my half-brother, the one I'd failed by staying quiet, would do what they wouldn't. And I needed to know whether the thing I'd found in those financial records was the start of something uglier. Camden had been right. My disappearance was a double trap. I was testing them, and if they were who I feared they were going to test how easy it would be to erase me. That was why, after Blair's door slammed and Graham's $50 handshake ended, I didn't go back to warmth. I headed east, toward the last door, toward Miles Calder's small house in Juniper Flats. And as I walked through the thinning night, one thought kept cycling through my head like a warning siren I couldn't turn off. If Miles opens the door, I'll learn who still has a heart. If he doesn't, Then I'll learn something worse. I'll learn I built a family where love doesn't live anymore. And when I reached the block where his streetlights were dimmer and the houses sat closer together, I slowed down my throat, tight my hand already lifting toward the doorbell. Because now the test wasn't theoretical. Now it was personal. Now it was going to decide what was left of me. Juniper Flats didn't announce itself the way Westlake Crest did. No polished stone walls, no cameras tucked into sleek black panels, no gate that decided who deserved to exist on the other side. It was just a working-class street in East Austin with uneven sidewalks, tired porch lights, and a few cars that looked like they'd been repaired more times than replaced. A wooden fence leaned at the kind of angle you only notice when you've spent your whole life around things that don't lean. Someone had a wind chime on a porch that sounded like it had been there since before the neighborhood started changing. Miles's house sat halfway down the block, small one-story paint, a little faded with a narrow strip of yard out front. The yard wasn't manicured. It was cared for. There were winter-hardy flowers clustered near the steps, and even in the cold, something about them felt stubbornly alive. My hand hovered over the doorbell. I didn't know what scared me more, him turning me away, or him letting me in and proving that I'd been wrong about who the real family was all along. Before I could lose my nerve, I pressed it. Footsteps, quick light. The latch clicked. Elena opened the door first. Her hair was pulled back like she'd been moving all day, even though it was late. She wore a worn sweater and soft pants, the kind of clothes that didn't pretend to be anything. Her face changed the second she saw me, eyes widening, mouth parting, a hand going straight to her chest like her body reacted before her thoughts caught up. Van, she breathed like my name belonged in her house more than I did. And then, without looking over my shoulder, without scanning the street for witnesses, she reached out, gripped my arm with both hands, and pulled me inside. "Oh my God," she said, voice shaking. "What happened to you? You're freezing." Warmth hit me like a wave. Not just heat smell, sound life. A small kitchen light on. A faint scent of soup and laundry detergent. The hum of a cheap heater working overtime. It didn't feel impressive. It felt real. "Elena," I started, but my throat locked up. Words didn't fit right in the doorway after what Blair and Graham had done to me. She was already calling into the house. Miles, get in here now." Miles appeared from the hall in a gray t-shirt and old jeans, like he'd been folding something or grading papers. The moment his eyes landed on me, his whole body shifted. He didn't stand there deciding what my presence might cost him. He moved. He crossed the room in 2 steps and put his hands on my shoulders, then my arms, checking me like he expected bruises, like he was looking for damage the way a teacher looks for injuries on a kid who's been quiet too long. "Van," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "What the hell, are you okay? Did someone hurt you? Where have you been?" I shook my head, trying to keep the story simple the way I'd rehearsed it. I lost everything. I don't have anywhere to go. I just need a place to sleep. One night. Miles didn't ask why I'd made the decisions I supposedly made. He didn't ask how it would look. He didn't ask who might find out. He said, "You're staying here." Just like that. Elena was already moving, pulling a blanket off the back of a chair and draping it over my shoulders. The fabric was soft, a little faded, and it smelled like clean warmth. "Sit," she ordered, gently guiding me toward their couch. It was small and a bit worn, with a patch on one arm where the fabric had thinned from too many years of use. When I sat, my legs finally gave in like they'd been holding me upright on spite alone. Miles crouched in front of me, eyes locked on mine. "Tell me what you need." I swallowed. "I just needed a roof." "You got it," he said. "You're safe here." Elena disappeared into the back of the house and returned with towels and a change of clothes that had Miles's shape in them, sweatpants, a sweatshirt. "Hot water takes a minute," she said, already turning toward the bathroom like she was in charge of the crisis. "But you're getting a shower. Your hands are like ice." I stared at them, at this simple, immediate care, and something inside me buckled. Not because it surprised me that they were kind, because it forced me to remember every time I'd been less kind than this. The shower was small, The tiles chipped the curtain patched. The water sputtered, and then finally ran hot. I stood under it until the heat stopped hurting and started feeling like I belonged in my own skin again. I didn't cry in there, not yet, but my throat burned like I might. When I came out, my old clothes were folded in a pile like Elena didn't want to insult me by throwing them away. Clean clothes waited on the bed, Miles. The fabric hung loose on me, but it was dry, soft, human. The kitchen table was barely big enough for four, and Elena set a bowl in front of me like it was an offering vegetable soup toast and a cup of coffee that smelled cheap and honest. Nothing fancy, nothing curated for an image, just food. I ate like I hadn't eaten in years, and in a way I hadn't. Not this. Not something given without a price tag. Miles sat across from me, elbows on the table, watching me. Not with pity, but with that quiet focus teachers have when they're trying to understand what a person isn't saying. Elena leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes soft. She watched Miles as much as she watched me, like she was tracking the heartbeat of her home. When the bowl was empty, Miles started talking the way he always did about his students. A kid who came in every morning pretending he wasn't hungry, and how Miles had started leaving granola bars on his desk like it was an accident. A girl who hated reading because she'd been told she was bad at it, and how she'd finally read a full paragraph out loud that day without stumbling. His eyes lit up when he spoke, and it hit me with a strange clarity. Blair and Graham measured their days by upgrades and deals. Miles measured his by small miracles. Elena smiled when he talked about the kids, then added her own details like she was stitching their life together out loud, how they stretched meals by buying frozen vegetables in bulk, how she picked up extra cleaning shifts when the car needed repairs, how the flowers out front weren't expensive ones, just hardy ones that didn't mind being overlooked. Everything in their house had a story that wasn't about status. It was about survival, about choice. When I tried to protest about the sleeping arrangements, Elena shut it down with a look. "You're taking the bed," she said. "End of discussion." Miles nodded like it was obvious. "We'll take the couch." "I can take the couch," I insisted too quickly. "I'm fine." "I don't." Elena stepped closer, her voice lowering, softer but somehow firmer. "Van, your family. Family doesn't leave you on a couch when there's a bed." The word family landed like a stone in my chest. Later, when they thought I was asleep, the thin walls did what thin walls always do. I lay in the small bedroom staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. The sheets smelled like detergent and lavender from a cheap air freshener. The room wasn't big, but it held peace. In the living room, I heard Miles's voice, low, strained. "Elena, we can't afford another person right now." "Not really. My paycheck barely." "I know." Elena replied, calm in a way that made my skin tighten. "I've been thinking about it." A drawer opened. I heard metal clink softly. "We can sell it," she said. There was a pause. Miles's voice came sharper. "No." "Why not?" Elena asked, and she didn't sound dramatic. She sounded practical. "It's just a ring. Our marriage isn't in a piece of metal." My chest went cold again, but this time it had nothing to do with the air. Miles exhaled like he was fighting himself. "That ring, it matters to you. It mattered when we bought it because it meant we chose each other," Elena said. "We're still choosing each other. And right now your brother needs food. He needs warmth. He needs time to figure out what's next." "How much would we even get?" Miles asked, and the question sounded like surrender. "A couple hundred," Elena said. "Maybe 3. Enough to buy groceries for a few weeks, enough to make sure he doesn't feel like a burden every time he takes a sip of coffee." I closed my eyes hard. I'd watched Blair shut a door behind a chandelier. I'd watched Graham try to buy me off with $50. And here, in the only house on my list that didn't come with a gate code, a woman I'd barely defended at family dinners was talking about pawning the only symbol they owned that looked even remotely like luxury. Not because she wanted credit, because she didn't know how to do it any other way. A minute later, I heard them settling onto the couch springs, creaking, fabric shifting. Miles apologized under his breath for how uncomfortable it was. Elena brushed him off with a quiet laugh. "It's fine," she whispered. "Just think about him sleeping warm." Those words made my throat sting. I turned onto my side and stared at the dim outline of the room. In the corner, a small framed photo sat on a dresser, Miles and Elena on their wedding day. Nothing extravagant, but their smiles were the kind you couldn't purchase. And as I lay there listening to their breathing through the wall, another thought pushed through the shame and exhaustion. Miles had tried to warn me before. It came to me suddenly like a light flicking on in a dark hallway, an email I'd skimmed weeks ago and dismissed because I was busy. A message from Miles with a subject line that felt too cautious to take seriously. You should double-check the paperwork. I'd assumed it was him worrying about something he didn't understand. Miles worrying like he always did. I'd told myself I'd look at it later. Later had turned into this. My hand drifted toward the pocket of my old coat where I'd hidden the burner phone Camden gave me. I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to. I already knew. This house, this little honest house, was going to become something else in the morning. Not just refuge, a courtroom. And the only thing that frightened me more than Blair and Graham seeing the truth was imagining how they'd react when they realized they'd lost control of the story. Because people like them didn't just apologize. They counterattacked. Morning came gray and quiet, the kind of Austin dawn that made everything look softer than it felt. I woke to the smell of cheap coffee and toasted bread. For a second, I didn't remember where I was then. The couch springs creaked in the living room and reality settled back into my body. Elena was in the kitchen, moving with the steady rhythm of someone who learned long ago that panic doesn't change what needs doing. She poured coffee into mismatched mugs. One of them had a chipped rim. She didn't care. Miles stood near the door, tying his shoes, a lunch bag in hand. The kind of lunch bag teachers carry when they refuse to spend money on themselves. He looked tired in that way. Good people get tired wearing responsibility like a second skin. When his eyes met mine, his face softened. You sleep okay, I did, I said, and it was true. I'd slept in a bed that wasn't mine, and felt safer than I'd felt in my own condo in weeks. Miles stepped closer and squeezed my shoulder. You're gonna be all right. We'll figure it out. The way he said it, like we was automatic, made my chest tighten again. Elena watched us from the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter. Her gaze wasn't suspicious in a harsh way. It was attentive, calm, like she'd been listening to the spaces between my words since the moment I stepped through her door. Miles glanced at the clock. I gotta go early, he said. I have to set up before the kids get there. He hesitated like he didn't want to leave me. Elena gave him a small nod. Go. I'm here. Miles looked back at me. Eat, he said. Don't argue. And don't go anywhere. Just be. Then he left and the door clicked shut behind him. The house felt different with him gone. Quieter. Tighter. Elena slid a mug toward me across the table. Coffee, she said, sitting down slowly like she was choosing the moment. It's not good coffee, but it's hot. I wrapped my hands around it. The warmth seeped into my fingers. She didn't talk right away. She let the silence sit until it became impossible to pretend it wasn't intentional. Then she said gently, Van, can I ask you something? I forced a small smile. Sure. She held my gaze. Why did you walk to those houses? The question wasn't accusing. It was precise. I blinked. What do you mean? I mean, she said, voice steady. If you were really in trouble, if you really lost everything, most people don't walk around like that knocking on doors. They call someone. They call a friend. They call a lawyer. They call a bank. They call anyone. But you walked. My grip tightened on the mug. Elena continued, still calm. And your story has gaps. Not the kind that come from trauma, the kind that come from someone choosing what to reveal. I stared down at the coffee, watching it tremble slightly because my hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. She leaned in a fraction. You sit like someone who's used to being in control, she added softly. Even when you're exhausted. You listen to sounds outside like you're tracking them. You don't flinch the way most people do when they're truly panicked. You manage yourself. I swallowed. The burner phone in my coat felt heavier than it should have. Elena didn't reach for it. She didn't push. She waited, giving me a kind of respect Blair and Graham never gave anyone they considered beneath them. I exhaled slowly. "You're right," I said, and the words tasted like defeat and relief at the same time. "I'm not telling you everything." Elena's expression didn't change, I figured. I let out a humorless laugh. "Of course you did." She lifted one shoulder slightly. "I clean offices. People talk when they think you're invisible. You learn to read what matters." The shame hit me fast. Not because she was wrong, because she was right, and I'd spent years ignoring that kind of intelligence. "I'm not completely broke," I admitted. "And this isn't just what it looks like." Elena nodded once. "Okay." I hesitated, then said I needed to know something. About my family. Her eyes softened, but she didn't let me off the hook. "And you decided the best way to know was to show up looking like the world forgot you." I didn't answer. My silence answered for me. Elena took a sip of coffee, then said quietly, "I suspected last night." My head snapped up. "You did?" She nodded. Not in a neat way. More like, something didn't line up. The way you spoke, the way you watched the room, the way you reacted when Miles mentioned money. People who've truly lost everything don't talk about it like they're reading a script. They talk like it's eating them alive. My throat tightened. "But I opened the door anyway," she continued. "Because even if you were lying, the right response to someone asking for shelter isn't a locked door, it's compassion." That sentence knocked the air out of me. I'd walked into this thinking I held the moral high ground because I was the one testing people. Elena had stepped over the whole test and landed on something cleaner, doing the right thing without needing proof that it would be rewarded. I rubbed my face with my hands. "I didn't want to use you," I said, voice rough. "I didn't want you to feel like you were part of my plan." Elena's gaze sharpened slightly. "Then don't." The words were simple, but they carried weight. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the burner phone, placing it on the table between us like a confession. The screen lit up with a notification I hadn't checked yet. Camden. I unlocked it with shaky fingers and read the message. "Van. We got a request while you were off-grid. Verification of status. Also an attempt to change signing authority on a trust-adjacent account. Not enough to accuse anyone yet. But it's movement. Call me when you can." My stomach turned. Elena watched my face. "What is it?" I stared at the message, the words blurring slightly because the truth was settling in like ice. "They're doing something," I said quietly. "While I'm gone." Elena didn't look surprised. She looked grimly validated. "I heard something once," she said after a moment, voice low, "at a family get-together. Blair was on the patio talking like she thought no one was listening. She mentioned paperwork and authorization, and made a joke about how, if Van is busy or unreachable, someone needs to be able to handle things. My blood went cold. "You didn't tell me that," I said. Elena's eyes held mine. "You didn't exactly make it easy to talk to you." The truth of that stung. I closed my eyes for a second and saw the dinner table again, Blair smirking. Graham smiling like he'd already won something. Miles sitting slightly apart. Elena quiet, watching everything. "How long have you been carrying that?" I asked. Elena exhaled. "Long enough to know you don't fix this by pretending it isn't happening." Silence stretched between us, thick with the sound of a garbage truck outside and a neighbor's dog barking, once then going quiet. Somewhere down the street, a car started and pulled away. I looked at the burner phone again. Camden's message felt like a clock ticking. "I haven't told Miles," I said. Elena's expression softened for a moment. "He loves you. He'll stand with you. But don't mistake his love for permission to treat him like a tool." The words hit hard because they were exactly what I deserved to hear. I swallowed. "What do you want from me?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Two things." My chest tightened. First, she said, Don't make decisions that burn everything down just because you're angry. Anger feels clean in the moment. It isn't. It leaves ash everywhere. I stared at her, realizing she was talking about more than my siblings. She was talking about me too, about the part of me that wanted to punish, to erase, to win. And second, she continued, voice firm, you owe Miles more than gratitude. You owe him an apology for every time you stayed quiet while they treated him like he didn't belong. Not a speech. Action. My throat went tight. You want me to say sorry? I want you to mean it, Elena corrected. And I want you to show it. In that moment, the power shifted in a way that felt almost unreal. I had money influence lawyers. And yet in this small kitchen with a chipped mug and cheap coffee, Elena was the one laying down the rules. Because she was right. Because decency was the only currency in this room. I nodded slowly. Okay. Elena's shoulders eased slightly, like she'd been holding tension since the second she opened the door last night. Good. I picked up the burner phone and stood, walking to the small window over the sink. Outside Juniper Flats was waking up people stepping onto porches, a neighbor dragging a trash bin to the curb, sunlight trying to break through gray clouds. This neighborhood didn't hide behind gates. It didn't pretend. My stomach churned anyway because I knew what was coming. I dialed Camden. He answered on the second ring. Van. I need to change the plan, I said, keeping my voice low. A pause. Talk to me. Come at the scheduled time, I said. Bring what you need to prove who I am. Bring security. And bring the package. Camden didn't interrupt. But do not bring the paperwork that locks in permanent punishments. I added the words tasting like iron. Not today. Camden exhaled slowly. Understood. You want confrontation, not annihilation. Yes, I said, and my voice cracked slightly. I want the truth on the table. I want them to face what they did. But I'm not going to make irreversible moves in pure rage. Elena watched me from the table, her face unreadable but steady. Camden's voice came careful now. You realize they may come in swinging, right? I know, I said. And Van, he added quieter, if they were trying to shift authority while you were unreachable today matters. Keep your head. I will, I promised. I ended the call and stood there for a second, staring at the small sink, the dish rack, the little details of a life built on effort instead of entitlement. When I turned back, Elena was still watching me. I swallowed hard. When Miles gets home, I said, I'm telling him everything. Elena nodded once, approving. Good. I looked toward the hallway, imagining Miles in his classroom right now, writing on a whiteboard, handing out worksheets, making sure kids who came in hungry didn't feel ashamed about it. He'd been protecting people his whole life. Today I was about to drag him into a storm. And as the morning light grew brighter through the cheap curtains, one truth settled in my chest with heavy clarity. This house was going to be the battlefield. But it was also the place where I finally had to pay my debt to my half-brother, to his wife, and to the part of myself I'd let go quiet for too long. By the time the first black SUV rolled onto Juniper Flats, the neighborhood had fully woken up. It was just after 8:30. The air still carried a faint chill, but the sun had burned through most of the gray leaving that washed out Austin morning light that made everything look too honest to hide behind. Someone across the street was watering their lawn. A man 2 houses down loaded tools into the back of a pickup. Life moved on the way it always did here, quiet, practical, unconcerned with appearances. The SUV did not belong. It eased to the curb like a shadow, followed by a second one just as dark, just as deliberate. Engines idled low and controlled. Doors opened in sequence, not rushed, not dramatic. People noticed. Curtains shifted. A woman stepped onto her porch and froze mid-step, hand still on the screen door. Conversations lowered by a notch. Camden Rourke stepped out first. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked like it had never seen dust, never mind the uneven sidewalk he now stood on. A leather briefcase hung from his hand, polished enough to reflect the sky. 2 security men followed him, scanning the street without making a show of it. They didn't need to. The contrast did the work for them. Inside the house, Elena stood at the window for a moment watching the street change shape around those vehicles. Then she turned to me. "They're here," she said. Miles wasn't supposed to be. He'd left early for school, but less than an hour later, Elena's phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. A short call followed. Then the front door opened again and Miles came back in his lunch bag still in his hand, his brow furrowed. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes flicking from Elena to me. I didn't stall. Not anymore. "Miles," I said, standing up. "I need to tell you something. All of it." He nodded once. "Okay." The way he said it, steady open, made my stomach tighten more than anger ever could. "I'm not broke," I said. "Not the way I told you. I pretended to be." He didn't interrupt. "I disappeared on purpose," I continued. "I wanted to see who would help me when they thought I had nothing left. I went to Blair's house, then Graham's." Miles's jaw set, but he stayed silent. "They turned me away," I said. "Blair wouldn't let me in because she was afraid the neighbors would see. Graham gave me $50 and told me to clean myself up before we talked again." Miles finally looked away, not in disbelief, but in pain. "Jesus," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, "and I know how this sounds. I know it's messed up. But there was more. I found irregularities in the family accounts, things that didn't make sense. I thought, if I vanished, I'd learn who cared about me and whether anyone would try to move things while I was gone." Miles rubbed a hand over his face, then looked back at me. "Are you safe?" That was his first question. Not how much money was involved. Not what this meant for him. Not why I'd done something so extreme. Just whether I was okay. "Yeah," I said, and my voice cracked. "I am. Because of you." He exhaled slowly and nodded, absorbing it. "You must have been desperate," he said. "Not accusing, just stating a fact." "I was," I admitted. "And I'm sorry for lying to you, for putting you in this position." He didn't respond right away. He walked to the table, set his lunch bag down, and leaned back against the counter. "Do you remember that message I sent you a few months ago?" he asked. I frowned. "What message?" Miles met my eyes. "About the paperwork." The memory hit me like a delayed punch, a cautious text, a short email I'd skimmed and mentally filed under things to deal with later. "I do," I said quietly. "I overheard Blair talking," he continued, "about authorization, about what happens if you're unavailable." I didn't understand all of it, but it felt off. I tried to tell you. Shame crawled up my spine. I didn't listen. "No," he said gently. "You didn't." The weight of that settled between us, heavy and undeniable. A knock came at the door, then measured professional. Elena opened it, and Camden stepped inside, followed by security, who remained just inside the threshold, present but unobtrusive. The living room shrank. Camden greeted Miles with a polite nod, then turned to me. "We're set," he said calmly. He opened the briefcase and spread documents across the small dining table, careful not to crowd Elena's space. "Your accounts are stable," he continued. "Your companies are operating under temporary authority as planned. However," he slid one page forward, "during your absence there was an inquiry, a request to verify your status, and an attempt to initiate a change in signing authority related to a trust-adjacent account." Miles stiffened. Elena's eyes narrowed. "Do we know who made the request?" I asked. Camden shook his head. "Not definitively, but the timing is notable." Elena crossed her arms. "This house isn't a stage," she said quietly. "If this turns into something ugly, it won't happen for spectacle." Camden met her gaze respectfully. "Understood." I felt the pull in my chest again, that urge to let anger take the wheel, to let this become punishment instead of reckoning. But Elena's words from earlier echoed in my head. Truth had to have a purpose. Camden closed the folder and looked at me. "There's something else," he said. He reached into the briefcase and removed a sealed envelope and a thick packet of documents. "The financial instrument is one thing," he said, But these outline your ownership, the structure of the trust, and the clauses that trigger immediate restriction if interference is detected. The stakes rose in the room like pressure before a storm. Before I could respond, Miles spoke. "When they get here," he said, voice firm, "don't change." I looked at him. "What, don't dress up?" he clarified. "Don't suddenly look like the version of you they respect. Let them see exactly who they turned away." Elena nodded. They should face what they were afraid of. I glanced down at the borrowed clothes, the worn sneakers, the absence of polish. "Okay," I said. Camden checked his watch. "They've been notified," he said. "They're on their way." My heart began to pound, not with fear, but with the weight of what was about to be exposed. Outside engines approached. At exactly 10 o'clock, the sound of luxury cut through Juniper Flats. A silver Mercedes pulled to the curb, followed closely by a BMW. The street seemed to hold its breath. A neighbor across the way paused mid-conversation. Someone else pretended to adjust a mailbox while watching openly. Blair stepped out, first, sunglasses on, posture rigid. Graham followed, irritation written into the set of his jaw. They walked up to the house like they were doing a favor. Blair knocked once, sharp and impatient. Elena opened the door. The moment Blair saw Camden inside, flanked by security, something shifted in her expression. The casual disdain faltered, replaced by something tighter. "What is this?" she asked, stepping inside anyway. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the smallness, the mismatch of furniture, the lack of anything she could anchor her superiority to. Graham's gaze landed on me. He scoffed. "You're still doing this," he said. "What is this, some kind of stunt?" I didn't stand. I didn't adjust my clothes. I stayed exactly where I was. "I came to your door," I said evenly. "Cold. Hungry. Asking for one night. You both turned me away." Blair crossed her arms. "We thought you were being scammed. You could have been lying." "I was lying," I said, "about being broke. But you didn't know that. You thought I was just another person without anything to offer." Graham snorted. "This is manipulative. You disappear, then show up looking like this to test us. That's not normal, Van. You didn't fail because you didn't recognize me," I replied. "You failed because of how easily you dismissed someone you thought didn't matter." Blair's face tightened. "That's not fair." Camden cleared his throat, a subtle sound that cut through the room. Blair turned on him instantly. "Who are you, and why are you here?" Camden met her gaze calmly. "I represent your brother." Her tone shifted immediately. "Does this affect anything legally, I mean?" The speed of the pivot said everything. Graham laughed harshly and turned to Miles. "Of course you let him stay here. What did you think was going to happen? That he'd thank you with a check?" Miles didn't respond. Elena did. "If we wanted money," she said quietly, "we wouldn't have talked about selling our wedding ring." The room went silent. Blair's mouth opened, then closed. Camden placed a document on the table. "There were attempts to access accounts while Mr. Slade was unreachable," he said. "We're not assigning blame yet. But we are asking questions." Blair looked at Graham. "What is he talking about?" Graham stiffened. "I didn't do anything." "You knew about this," Blair pressed. The crack between them widened, visible and sharp. Camden closed the folder and looked at both of them. "Before we discuss next steps," he said, "there are things you need to understand about who your brother is and what he controls." I watched fear finally replace arrogance on their faces. Not fear of hurting me. Fear of losing what they assumed was theirs. And as Camden reached for the envelope in his briefcase, I realized something with unsettling clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about whether any of us would leave this room as the same people who entered it. Camden waited until the room finished arguing with itself. Voices overlapped, accusations circled, explanations collapsed into excuses. Blair paced. Graham stood rigid near the wall, jaw-tight, eyes darting between Camden and me like he was calculating angles that no longer existed. Then Camden raised one hand. "Enough," he said, not loud, certain. The room obeyed. He set his briefcase on the small dining table, the cheap wood creaking softly under the weight. That sound so ordinary somehow made what followed hit harder. Camden opened the case. He took out the first folder and placed it flat on the table, sliding it toward the center so everyone could see. This, he said, is the current ownership and control structure of Mr. Slade's assets. Every company, every holding, every trust-connected vehicle. Blair leaned forward instinctively. Graham didn't move. Camden placed the second document on top of the first. These are verified statements from the last 90 days, he continued. Operations liquidity revenue. There has been no collapse, no bankruptcy, no distress. The words settled like dust after an explosion. Then Camden paused. He reached back into the briefcase and removed a single object sealed inside a clear sleeve. A check, not a copy, not a summary, the real thing. $100 million. No one spoke. I stayed where I was, still wearing Miles's sweatshirt, still looking like the version of myself they had refused to shelter. I didn't reach for the table. I didn't acknowledge the number. Blair did. Her eyes locked onto the check before she looked at me. Her breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. Graham reacted differently. He stepped closer, voice sharp. This is legitimate, right? This isn't some stunt. Camden met his stare. It is legitimate, and it is only one part of what your brother controls. I watched them carefully then, not as siblings but as case studies. They weren't shaken by the thought of me sleeping in the cold. They were shaken by the confirmation that I never needed to. Camden continued, pulling out one final document. There's an additional provision you should be aware of, a protective clause. In the event of unauthorized attempts to access, verify, or modify control, while Mr. Slade is unavailable, access is frozen and an inquiry is triggered. He tapped a date on the page. The request made during his disappearance falls within that window. The room tightened. Blair turned toward Graham slowly. What did you do? I didn't, he started, then stopped himself too late. I mean, I didn't change anything. Camden's gaze sharpened. Who provided the identifying information for the request? Silence stretched. Not the quiet of innocence, the quiet of exposure. I leaned forward then, not to point at the check, but to say the one thing that mattered more. Last night I said they talked about selling their wedding rings. Everyone looked at me. Miles and Elena, I continued. They were worried about food, about making sure I ate. Elena opened a drawer and laid them out on the table. They knew they'd get a few $100s at best. Elena didn't look embarrassed. She looked steady. If I really were who you thought I was, I asked Blair and Graham, would you have let me freeze so you could keep your image intact? Blair shook her head quickly. I'm sorry, she said. I panicked. I thought it was a scam. Elena spoke calmly, cutting through the performance. You didn't ask if he was hungry. You didn't ask if he was cold. You checked the street. Blair's mouth opened. No words came. Graham turned defensive fast. This is ridiculous. You're making it sound like we're villains. He manipulated us. Miles stood up. He didn't raise his voice. You've spent years acting like my life was a mistake, he said. Like my job made me small. Like marrying Elena was settling. But if that man on the porch hadn't been our brother, you would have done the same thing. The room felt smaller. I don't want his money, Miles continued. I want you to understand what you did. I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them. I prepared the paperwork to cut you both off today, I said plainly. It's ready. Blair's face drained of color. But I'm not signing it, I continued. Not today. Elena's earlier words echoed in my mind. About weapons, about purpose. This isn't forgiveness, I said. It's a boundary. And a clock. Camden nodded. The conditions will be formalized. I looked at Blair and Graham one last time. This is the last time I stand in front of you with an open door. By late morning, the street outside Juniper Flats had returned to something resembling normal. The SUVs were gone. The luxury cars pulled away quietly, no doors slammed, no last words shouted. Neighbors drifted back inside. Curiosity faded. Inside the house, the air felt different. Lighter. Raw. Camden sat at the table with his laptop open, drafting language with careful precision. "This will be an addendum," he explained. "Legally binding. Time-bound. Enforceable." He read through the conditions slowly. 36 months. Verified family therapy attendance. Documented volunteer hours with organizations serving unhoused communities. Direct apologies face-to-face without deflection. No unsupervised access to accounts or instruments. No financial bailouts. Then Elena spoke. "One more thing," she said. Camden looked up. "He has to be in it too," she said, nodding toward me. "No more using money to avoid discomfort. No more disappearing instead of talking." I didn't hesitate. "Put it in," Camden typed. When the document was complete, signatures followed, one by one. No ceremony, just ink. I turned to Blair and Graham. "The allowances stop now," I said. "If you want something, you earn it. The same way everyone else does." Graham opened his mouth to negotiate. Camden shut that door instantly. "This isn't a transaction," he said flatly. I didn't hand Miles a check. Instead, I told him about the house near his school, about the classroom fund, about clearing the debts quietly. "This isn't payment," I said. "It's recognition." Then I faced Elena. "I failed you," I said. "Every time I stayed quiet, every time I let you be diminished. I was wrong." She nodded once. "We'll see," she said. With time. When Camden packed up and left when the paperwork was done and the future uncertain but defined, I sat back down on the same worn sofa where I'd slept. $100 million hadn't saved me. This place had. And for the first time in a long while, I understood what being rich was actually supposed to mean.